Hello, friends. I figured this would be a fitting background for the moment. But I need to summarize something. We gotta talk about this, okay? Two things that we're gonna start out with. And please hear me out. Hear me out, please. I want you to be able to just listen to what I say before you immediately react. Just finish watching the video first. Because the reason, part of why we have this mess is because nobody actually finished anything. We'll get into that in a second. First of all, number one, the memes that came out of this situation. Mwah, glorious. It's so good. It will never not be funny. The idea of having like this scene of them crying at the K Town with the audio of like Zach from Psychic Pebbles on Oni Plays going, "I'll hit the Pentagon Isle." I love that reaction so much. It doesn't matter the channel. I'll hit the Pentagon Isle. It's amazing. And having them cry over that, or May bounding from building to building, and then it cuts to the Twin Tower explosion, just you can't. This stuff writes itself. It's amazing. It's glorious. It's the best. It's the only 9/11 memes that I've ever actually laughed at. So those are great. But number two, the actual point of this is, did anyone actually watch the video, or did everybody just hear somebody get angry about it on Twitter? Because the magic that is that echo chamber, just, it boggles the mind how much misinformation can spread. Did nobody actually take the time to watch the 11-minute video that actually created all of the hullabaloo? Like, in the video, he even mentions the fact that if they focused on 9/11, it would have messed up the tone. Everybody just thought that, like, he was just like, oh, it's another angry conservative upset about the movie about puberty for girls, and they should have talked about 9/11 instead. That is not what the review is about. That isn't even what happened in the few, like, 50 seconds of the video that he actually mentions that. Nobody seems to actually have watched the video. Nobody has seemed to listen to any of the clarifications made. They just are like, oh, here's an option to hate on somebody who I think is doing bad. Let's go scream at him and not actually take some time to understand the situation. I'm gonna spend way longer than 10 minutes to be upset about this and not spend the 10 minutes actually listening to the video. So I went down the rabbit hole, and now Mr. Enter isn't somebody who I always agree with. In fact, I would say that quite often I will end up not necessarily agreeing with a number of, at least a lot of his older videos and stuff like that. You gotta take what he says with a bit of a grain of salt. Because he's not the best at articulating everything all the time, but he tries. He's just very bad at saying good things. He's very bad at being good, but he has a very good heart, and nobody seems to understand that. Like, has anybody noticed the fact that he has, like, blatantly come out and said that he has made lots and lots of mistakes and continues to make mistakes and wants to be better and has been trying to be better? And if people have actually been looking at his channel, like, I, mesmerized by studying the stuff that he makes, has been able to see him work to improve as a person. Did anyone actually watch the review and realize that he has called out a lot of the people who are upset about the movie for just being a thing about puberty and teenage girls and everything? He called out people who are upset about it, and even said that he wanted that to be more of a focus because he felt that it wasn't enough in the movie, and it felt more like Disney pandering, like saying, oh, here's an LGBTQ something that you can just get rid of in another film. He wanted more of that. Did anybody even listen? He brought up the fact that if they did, it would have messed up the style of what they were going for. Now, again, Mr. Enter is very clunky about some of the ways that he says some things, so he was just like, oh, anime wasn't really that big of a thing. But eventually it is implied that he understood that they were going for an anime aesthetic, which, as it turns out, the creator had confirmed that was the case. he had just brought up the fact that that wasn't the main style at the time, but that that was just what they wanted to go for this style instead. Um, and that the style of the time was much more dark and much more edgy and much more emo. This was the time when people were like, yeah, Shadow the Hedgehog, we want that to be the darker Sonic. We don't want the happy, bright stuff. Yeah, this is what's good. And he basically just essentially just said that, like, it doesn't quite feel like the tone because it's super in your face, and it, it kind of was a bit more of an exaggeration, which again, he brings up the fact that, like, if it was supposed to be a little bit earlier, some of before, ugh, I my brain is scattered too. But he brings up in the video that, like, his main issue is that all of this is happening right after, canonically this movie is set in 2002. And I think most people feel it's much more of just a general early 2000s vibe, which is why it's romanticized that so many people would have flip phones and there was so much extra stuff. And it's made for an audience now. It's not necessarily a huge period piece. It's actually a period piece. You know, if you get what I'm putting down there. Um, which he acknowledges that fact in the review as well, but he was just upset that it wasn't, it didn't acknowledge the fact that things were a little bit more somber, and part of why it was somber was because of the fact that, 9/11 had happened, and he even acknowledges that this took place in Canada, which some people are upset that he's just like, don't people know that this was in Canada and not the United States? It's like, he mentioned that as well. So, like, he says that, like, it still, like, affected other things. There should have been much more emo stuff as opposed to the boy band stuff. And that's basically he was just, it's one random dumb opinion on the internet where it's just like, yeah, the movies, if it was going to be a bit more related to the early 2000s, that's kind of the way that it should lean. But he acknowledged the fact that that isn't what they were going for. Like, he acknowledges this. It's just that if he was going to be making it, he would have wanted it to lean more into the stuff that it says it's leaning into. He had praised the fact that he liked the dynamic between May and her friends. He liked that. He liked most of the movie. He didn't like how the father was barely a character and everybody seems to just not care. The father just didn't have much of a say in everything. And even earlier in the video where he's like, is this how, like, more Asian families act? Because he had heard that, a lot more Asian families are stereotypically more strict about this kind of stuff. But even though he questions it, he accepts that was real later. That's just the way that he wrote the script, and it was kind of clunky because he then says, oh no, actually, it's not that she's unrealistic, it's that she's way too unrealistically mean. She's too realistically mean. Thus, accepting the fact that he is aware of it. It was just, he's not very good at this, guys. But yeah, if you just give it a chance, there are some interesting points that I never would have even necessarily thought about given the actual movie itself. It's like, yeah, that wasn't exactly how the time was. That is closer. That's just an interesting point to bring up. He isn't saying that the movie should have been about 9/11 instead of puberty. He even he brings these points up in the video. Nobody cared. Everybody heard that something from Twitter. Then they heard, oh, somebody else said something about him on Twitter, and then it just spiraled into a huge snowball that isn't even anything related to the video. So many of the points people bring up against him are things that he talked about in the video and understood. Come on. Now listen, again, if you just watch Mr. Enter and you go in with the mindset of, oh, I want to catch him because he's going to be bad, he's going to say something and he's going to be just like all these other irredeemable people who tiptoe around actually saying what they mean. Guys, Mr. Enter is not Jordan Peterson. He's not Joe Rogan. He's not somebody who will say a slip of the tongue as a way to dog whistle the Fourth Reich. He's just very bad at trying to be good. He has a very good heart and is just very bad at being able to show that, and has apologized for the time. Nobody wants to listen to the times that he apologizes or has tried to make up or has successfully made up with people who he has hurt before and has made mistakes. Nobody wants to hear the apology. They just want to lynch him for what they heard somebody misinterpret the video as being. He didn't even, he's not even, no, the memes are hilarious, like I said at the beginning, but this isn't even what he wanted the movie to be about. He actually wanted the movie to just focus on being slightly more edgy. Even if it was just something like, once May ends up getting sad, she'd be slightly more emo. Now, granted, another thing that he didn't quite understand is that there actually is a lot more puberty imagery and symbolism in the movie. The red panda itself is more about the emotions. He was kind of focused more on the maxi pad situation, and that's just because he's not a girl who was growing up in the early 2000s or anything like that. So I don't think he necessarily was able to pick up on all of those things. But part of why he wasn't able to pick up on it, and part of why he said it was a mixed bag, was that he wasn't really able to enjoy the movie. Oh, sorry. No, this is better. Let's zoom in on her face. Part of why he said he wasn't able to enjoy the movie was because of how realistically evil the mom was, and how unrealistic it was that she was just redeemed the way that she was in the movie by the end, by by the talking scene. It's like, yeah, that's actually a pretty fair point. Not everybody will find it cathartic to have a very realistically mean parent who just gets Steven Universe redeemed at the end, no matter how much horrible things happen. He was just like, he wanted the parent to just be arrested for how awful of a person she was. And due to his own very terrible experience, and due to the fact that he has heard so many stories of people close to him horribly hurt without a happy ending, it made it so hard for him to be able to enjoy the movie. Did anyone actually care about that? No, they hate him because they think he hates the expression of puberty and should instead talk about 9/11, because those are patriotic, manly things that all conservatives do. He's not even a conservative. He's very easily tricked by conservative rhetoric, to which, once he realizes, apologizes, and then tries to do better. Nobody cares about this. Nobody cares about this, do they? Shame on you all for not actually trying to do more research and just letting this end up becoming a huge thing. Actually take a moment to listen to the people who are hurt, because so often in the world it ends up being, oh, turns out this person is actually bad. But you gotta still do it, because there are sometimes redeemable people, like Mr. Enter, who are just bad at being good and just need, like, a loving push in the right direction instead of screaming at him. Now, again, the way that he handled it on Twitter was also a mixed bag. Part of him was just being like, I don't care about the Twitter thing, I don't care, and then tweeting every, 5 minutes about how much he didn't care, or doing other things. And the way that he copes isn't exactly the best, by just being like, dum-de-dum, look at this bread, and stuff like that, and bringing up other stuff. But that's just because, he has a hard time being able to pick up on some social cues, and it's important to try and give him a little extra patience for that, because he's trying, but it's not like he has evil intentions in his heart. He wants to do better, he just doesn't know exactly how to be better all the time, and will mess things up. And I think that he needs to try and listen to a few more caring and trusting people who have his best interest in mind before he just does something more brash, or he won't realize exactly how something will be taken, and he ends up having a very angrier stance towards things, which is, makes him very much less approachable, because it seems like he's like most other angry cartoon reviewers out there who are very snobbish and think that they just know everything. Mr. Enter definitely looks like that on the surface. I totally understand why people don't like him initially, but you gotta take a moment to really give some people a chance, because there's more to a person than just a few mistakes. And you know how many death threats the man has gotten? You know how many people have told him to die because of, takes like this? And Mr. Edger started out as a guy who did that to other people, then realized it was wrong, then just felt ashamed and apologized to the people who he had done that to, because he didn't realize that he was internalizing it and was doing that to other people as well. And he admitted this. He was a big enough person to be able to admit when he was wrong. Interesting and fair point that not every character who is bad should necessarily be redeemed, or like the most unrealistic thing about it. I've seen other memes of people who have liked the movie but said that the most unrealistic thing was the mother basically being redeemed. Now, another thing is, because I listened to the creator had talked about how the Earthbound and Pokemon and some other stuff had inspired the design and the feel of the film. And it also mentioned that she didn't have the best relationship with her mom growing up, but eventually made up, and then they both went their own separate ways. And the movie was actually not about her necessarily being redeemed, but that they both accepted each other as being different people, and then moving on as different, who's my what's this? Being able to grow as different people and like different things and be totally, different, not have to live as the same stuff. So it wasn't necessarily about her just suddenly becoming a better person, because it turns out the mom isn't necessarily a better person, but she is able to change and become a better, like she's able to understand, and they can agree to disagree. Which the point that he brings up is the fact that basically, or the intention behind the point, rather, is that isn't necessarily realistic, which is actually a point that I've seen from a lot of other people who have gone through lots of terrible parents, and people who have liked the film and who are actually in the demographic who understand that, like, that doesn't end up actually happening a lot of the time, where they don't end up realizing it and things don't kind of work out nice. But this is a film that's supposed to be like a comfort for people who are like, hey, you know what, maybe that'll end up happening, maybe things will end up being nicer. In fact, even with my own situation, the movie isn't going to be for everybody, because not everybody will find catharsis in seeing a parent that evil be able to be nicer in the end. It's not going to happen to everybody. And nobody takes into the fact that he actually understood the pain of the film, but rather than finding it as a comfort, he found it very hard to watch, because they weren't, the mom wasn't either, the mom didn't have any traits that make her want to be somebody you'd want to redeem, especially compared to other people in like her age group. Even compared to like the aunts or something. It's like it isn't even just the generational trauma itself. She is just a terrible person on top of, not being able to connect with other people. And he has gone through so much of his own, like, abuse and trauma that it wasn't cathartic to him watching the film, and that made it hard. But he enjoyed the other parts of the movie and wanted more representation for people who, who menstruate and who go through this kind of situation. Nobody cares about that. It's just he's the same as everybody else who hates it. And that's it. So, I appreciate it if you listen to this. This video is even longer than the video itself, but I hope that it helped people to realize that, he is not the best. I don't always agree with what he says, but I find it interesting to hear his own thoughts on these kinds of things, because they're oftentimes a perspective that I never would have even thought about. Because it's like, oh yeah, flip phones, that was an old thing from the 2000s, and it's just like, oh yeah, they are kind of, they were not as prevalent back then. They were a lot more few and far between, and that this is just part of Disney romanticizing stuff for exaggeration purposes. But if they wanted to make it more accurate, that they would have toned that down and had been slightly more emo. But that isn't the direction they were going with, and he recognized that. It's just that that's what he would have personally wanted, and those were just his thoughts. That if it's just the equivalent of saying, this isn't the early 2000s, the early 2000s would have been more emo. And that's basically it. He just said it a little bit longer, and then people said, oh, you want the movie to be about them discussing the ramifications of the socio-political stuff regarding 9/11. It's just like, no, it was just a somber time, and 9/11 had caused it. And he even would have revoked that had they set the movie slightly before 2001. It was just in 2000, because he said that was a lot more of an optimistic time. And he just didn't care for the fact that it was also super in your face, partially because things were a lot more somber. But he didn't necessarily say that like that was the worst thing. It was just something that made it harder for him to be able to enjoy the film, along with one or two other points that are like, okay, that's a reasonable point. You don't even necessarily have to agree with it. I just feel like a lot of the time people just want to hate a straw man without actually understanding the point, and sometimes it's valid. But you should probably focus more on Mandapony, the guy who made a bunch of those FNAF songs, a bunch of other songs. Who, as it turns out, is actually a diddler of the youth variety, or he is on board with those kinds of things, and people just kind of ignore that. People just kind of just ignore that. People, nobody cares. Nobody talks about that. Nope, we got to talk about how Mr. Enter is basically made the same points that a lot of people made criticizing him. It's just like, why don't you understand this thing is this? And it's just like he did. He brought up those points in the video. He's just, you got to take what he's saying with a grain of salt and find the intention behind it, to which the intention was clarified on his Twitter. Clunky as it is, but it was then said. Like, he has addressed this. He isn't even trying to hide behind it. He had addressed the fact that it was a thing and wants to just move on. So those are my thoughts. That's me milking this sort of situation for content. Even though I actually just wanted to, talk about this because it's a thing that I've seen a whole bunch of times. And good on him for the fact that, as he had also stated before, he has gone through so many, awful things in his own life, the way that he has been treated terribly. And so many times he had been thinking of quitting and stopping and not being able to continue, and how hard it is for him to be able to just wake up in the morning some days. And he still continues to fight on. And even though he's not perfect at it, even though he still makes mistakes and he still messes up and will still be an idiot, he is constantly trying to be better. And it's just harder for him, and you just need a little bit of extra patience. Like, I think a lot of people forget the fact that he's like on the spectrum as well. So, and it's not something that, is an excuse or anything that I'd want to be like, oh, that's no excuse. But it's like, if you're going to give anyone patience, you got to understand that, like, there's a bit more of a reason due to his own mental situation that it's not as easy for him to just immediately click and understand these. I stopped tapping on the screen, so I don't know how much of that got in. But what I was saying is just take a moment to think about why you're reacting the way you're reacting to something. Is it just to justify the fact that you're not on the side deemed bad, or is it because you actually care about a situation? Think about yourself before you start hating different things, okay? Please. Please don't just hate something because you heard something. It annoys me so. And I appreciate anybody who's listened to this. It's longer than the video itself, and you could have just watched the video itself and then maybe understood what he was going for. But again, not everybody actually wants to pay attention to the discourse. I'm somebody who went down the rabbit hole and actually understands the position, because it's just like, it's fascinating to me. And I just like it. It's something that I find interesting. That, I just like to see the way that he continues to fight onwards, despite the world constantly bringing him down. And I think that's just something admirable. I don't think you should just try and cancel him as being the worst person because he's just not the best at it, but has very good intentions, but is just very, very bad at doing it, and often comes off as very angry. Because despite the fact that he seems like quite a lot of other people who you'd be more justified in doing that, he isn't, and a lot of people don't seem to understand that. So that is my whole take on the situation. Again, thank you for listening to Mr. Me ramble. And if you end up doing a controversy about me, I appreciate it because the channel's been staggering. I need the numbers. Because I'm hoping that one day when I end up having an actual controversy on my channel, it'll be over something very stupid, like over my taste of like pie or something like that, where it's like I don't care very much for apple pie, and then that'll end up becoming a huge thing where people get upset over it. I want it to be something innocent like that, because I don't condone, you know, a lot of the mistakes and bad things that he's done before. What I like is that he realized he was making mistakes and has done stuff to try and make up for that, and everybody likes to ignore that and just focus on what they hear about the mistakes that happen. So I don't condone the mistakes or the bad things that he has done. I agree that those are not good, but I will defend the fact that he actually genuinely tries, and over time, despite it having been slow, has actually been improving. He really has been. He's actually been following through on this. It isn't just saying that he'll improve and then he never does, because that's another thing that ends up happening quite often. But he does, and that's something admirable. And I think a lot of people just don't like that for another instance. Excuse me, not that they don't like it. They just don't care enough to look further into a situation because they would just prefer to be angry over something that fits their worldview, which is, you know, part of why a lot of conservative propaganda ends up being so easy to pick up. That's part of why he's tricked into it. That's part of why if you're angry at him without understanding the situation, you're doing just the same thing that they're doing. It's just a slightly better intention, but it's still a bad thing that you're doing. Please think about why you're doing it. Because if you're watching this, or if you're able to understand the point of this, please, I have faith in you all to be able to understand what's going on, and for you to be able to be better too. And it's okay if you make mistakes, because it's what you do about your mistakes that's important. And again, also, for the record, in case anybody's wondering, I thought this is a great movie. Okay, I thought it was very good. But yeah, there's a couple of little nitpicks that you can have about it. I don't think it's flawless. And those were just Mr. Enter's things, and they're just interesting perspectives. So take it as that. He's not trying to do actual evil in the world, guys. Come on. There are actual problems you should be focusing on. How many times have I tried to end this video and I just kept talking? I don't know. Anyway, thank you again. I gotta stop this now. I hit the Pentagon, Lyle! Look that up on Oni Plays. Look up Zach screaming about they hit the Pentagon, Lyle! In fact, no. Before we go, we have to look it up. We have to do that. Hold on. Here's the glorious Brandon Turner animation.
This was a very last-minute, short-notice, late-night rendezvous.
Chris ran into my room and started shaking me and said,
Lyle, wake up! You gotta wake up, please!
Lyle, turn the TV! They hit the Pentagon! They hit the fucking Pentagon!
I can't get up there.
Turn on TV, it doesn't matter what channel.
just having that over scenes of turning red is the best thing.
I started shaking me and said,
Lyle, wake up! You gotta wake up, please!
Lyle, turn the TV! They hit the Pentagon! They hit the fucking Pentagon!
I can't get up there.